Manufacturing and industrial environments provide their own unique challenges for wireless communications. Harsh conditions, both indoors and out, create a daunting task for engineers to work through. This is where we come to discuss those challenges, share ideas, and help one another out. My name is Scott McNeil, and welcome to the Industrial Wi-Fi Shop. Welcome, everybody. It is yet another episode of the Industrial Wi-Fi Shop. This is episode 8, Respect My Securit-ahh. With me, as of always, as of late, is the Vanna to my Pat Sajak, Jeremy Baker. How you doing, Jeremy?
I'm good. How are you, man?
It's good to have you back on the show, my man. After finally getting to meet you in person and hanging out down in Florida, that was good times.
That was a great time.
Before we get into some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, I do want to tell everyone about CWNP, the Certified Wireless Network Professional organization, is super awesome, and they have given me 2 copies. Melissa sent them to me. They have given me 2 copies of the Certified Wireless IoT Solutions Administrator study reference guides. So I am going to give these away. So in order to get your entry in, go to the industrialwifishop.com, go to the show notes for this episode, and in the show notes will be a link to a Google form for you to enter the drawing to win one of these 2 books. Now, there will be 2 separate drawings done, one for someone who is in IT and has an IT background. The other one is reserved for someone who is an OT, who actively works in OT. Go to the site and click on the link, and I promise it's only a minimal amount of malware, and fill out the form and click enter and enter your chance to win one of these awesome books to get you started down the path of CWNP certification, or if nothing else, as a reference material for just a ton of amazing information. Jeremy, do you have this book?
I don't yet, but I might try to. No, I'll just order it. But yeah,
It's very similar to the
it looks good.
It's very similar to the CWNA. A lot of the same content as far as all of your basics, your building blocks of wireless in general. Only this puts all of the IoT spin on everything. So you get all of your basics and then the IoT spin, which is really nice. So it's a fantastic book. It's a fantastic certification, and it can take you very, very far. So again, if you want a chance, go to the show notes for this episode at the industrialwifishop.com. Click the link and fill out the Google entry form. And then on episode 10, which has yet to be determined, we will be doing the drawing and giving away the 2 books. So that's what I got there.
Great. Yeah, I do like those books, except that they are not very packable. So I wish
They are not.
they'd break them into like
They are thick.
slim volumes of chapters.
They're
So I
heavy.
could easily
You could use them to defend yourself.
But that's where I got these guns from, so it's actually
Carrying
not
books.
bad. Yeah, that's especially like the IoT one. I think is pretty interesting, and I'm definitely gonna get into that further because that's a buzzsaw that you're just not really going to be able to avoid in any environment you're in
Well,
because every one of these manufacturers or plants, there's a new sensor that they can apply somewhere that needs to have some airtime and some ability to reach back and
and to
talk.
be
So
honest with you, when you look around out there, there are no certifications for industrial wireless. I don't even recall anything vendor specific. So IIoT and then IoT and all these different flavors of 802.15.4. This is as close as you get right now is the IoT track from CWNP.
mhm.
So it's the only thing that even touches on anything remotely industrial. As a matter of fact, this particular book does get into some detail about wireless HART and ISA 100.
That's yeah, and you love those.
Well, I mean, it's a common industrial wireless protocol, and it goes into a fair amount of depth in Bluetooth as well. And Bluetooth's universal; you find that everywhere. Anyway, go to my site.
Tell them again on the website. What's the
Yeah.
website?
industrialwifishop.com. Go to the show notes for episode 8, and click the link, fill out the
Yep.
form, download the malware, register to win the book.
And then you did mention that you were going to do how you were going to draw them, one from an IT individual and
Correct.
one
There'll be
from an
one
OT.
winner from IT and one winner from OT. That's how we're going to do it.
And you gotta submit, if you're an OT person, you gotta submit a picture of your steel toed.
Customized PPE is preferable. It's not going to help you win, but it's cool to see. So anyway, I just wanted to get into that real quick and let everybody know that that is a thing. And so let's get on with the show. So this episode, we are going to talk about what I refer to as owning your industrial airspace. You know, you cannot secure your wireless unless you cannot own your airspace unless you secure your airspace. And there is a lot of aspects to this. There's so much out there that just gets into the mechanics of the security of encryption. That's not what I'm talking about here. There is a whole lot of other things involved with owning your airspace. And this really, though it's directed towards an industrial environment, this really holds, all this stuff holds true for pretty much any environment when you think about it. So to own your industrial airspace, you need to really look at three major things here. You want to look at your situation awareness of your site. You need to understand the current RF landscape. And then finally, you do need to secure those wireless assets. And so really to kind of get into that, when we're talking about situational awareness, what am I talking about? Well, there's several questions you want to ask yourself. One, and some of this stuff is going to seem kind of stupid, but when we get into it, you'll see how much more sense it makes. Where is your site? Okay. Where is it? Is it out in the middle of the woods? Is it in an urban area? Are you in an industrial park? Is it on the coast? Is it in the heartlands? Where is it? And to take that one step further, what is around your site? So are you surrounded by woods and bears and woodland creatures? Yeah. Or are you surrounded by other businesses and buildings or other manufacturing plants because you're an industrial park? Or are you, because you're in an urban industrialized area, is it a mix of businesses, of residential, of other manufacturing? Or are you surrounded by residential areas? You know, there's a lot of different things you have to take a look at. And then on top of that, to the next step, who is around your site? You know, if you're a manufacturing plant and you're set right smack in the middle of a residential area, then you know you pretty much kind of have a static population around you. It's not changing a whole lot. If you're more in a urban downtown environment, then you have constant transient traffic. Constant. You have no idea who's coming and going around you. You don't know who's looking at your stuff all around you. There's a lot of variance. Now, if you're out in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere, there's a lot, which is the case with a lot of pulp and vapor. You know, really, you're worried about bears and lions and tigers, and that's about it, right? But still, even then, you have to pay attention to what's going on around you. And so understanding all of these things will help you understand what your situational awareness is and what your risk is associated with where your site is. To give all of this context, I was at a site a few years back. It was a paper mill, and this paper mill is actually on a barrier island, right? So first of all, that's kind of weird. You have a paper mill on a barrier island. The best part is it's not even the only one on that island. Where is it? It's on an island. What's around it? Well, it's backed up to the intercoastal waterway. And right next to the site, directly adjacent to it, is an international port. Just down from the international port is a very popular marina that gets in boats of all sizes from, multiple countries. All right. And then on the other side of that is another paper mill right there on the waterway. To the other side is a community boat launch. All right. And then on the island side of this facility, it's residential. So when you look at it, you've pretty much got every kind of variable you can have surrounding this site, right? And that really that got me to thinking when I was there doing the assessment for the site. So I spent one morning wandering through the neighborhoods around it, seeing if any of their RF was bleeding over into the residential areas. Well, fortunately, there were some thick banks of trees and whatnot that really limited that, and what could be seen was, barely getting any sort of beacon information. However, I was standing, down by their wood yard, which was right on the water, and I asked my contact who was with me that day. I said, I wish you guys had a site boat or something so we could go out. I really want to get some RF samples out there. And he's like, no worries, man. I got a boat. We'll bring it tomorrow. And so it was awesome. So the next day he put a boat. We launched it from the site right there next to the boat launch right next to the site, and went out right into dead. So we went dead center along the intercoastal waterway, and then we went close up right along the shore. On all my shore samples, the signal was very, very strong. Strong. When I say strong, I'm talking probably high 70s, mid to high 70s as far as our DB ratings were concerned. Neg 75, neg 76 on average. He was able to, with his work phone, connect right up and get to internal assets. Now, granted, we were fairly close to shore, so it'd be kind of obvious, on what we were doing. So we went out into the middle of the channel, and this was the best part. So in the middle of the channel, we're still getting readings of, I don't know, neg 78, neg 79. He could connect. He could get to a variety of internal resources on that company's wireless network. That's kind of scary when you think about it, especially within, the time frame that I was there. I was there for about 5-6 days. On more than one occasion, there were very large boats anchored out there in the waterway for the night, for 2 nights. And I say very large boats. I'm talking, 150, 125 foot, party barges and stuff. Let alone the big ships that come through slowly and that or moored up right next door. So that being said, when we went to lunch that day, we made a pit stop there at that port, because you could actually drive through it. It was a small port, can only accommodate 2 or 3 ships, but while we were driving through there, I was still seeing it strong enough, not necessarily to connect to, but if I wanted to capture traffic off it, I sure could have. Our site is on an island, and what's around our site is a lot of transient traffic from God knows where. On one side, you've got all of your residential, but which is a fairly static kind of thing. But on the waterway side, man, there's no telling what could be coming through there, where they could be coming from. Because this was down in Florida, so that coastal traffic, you never know, right? And it is the intercoastal waterway. You have everything that's going up and down, but it's also very close to an inlet because that's where the ships come in. International or local, it's a ton of unknown traffic, and your RF is right out there in the middle of it.
Yep. Well, I mean, that sounds like a nightmare. Really.
So yeah, dude, it was kind of crazy. And so what does that translate into risk? Well, that actually translates into a fairly high risk when you think about it, because of the mass amounts of unknown, especially for the fact that we were sitting there on a little fishing boat, a 15-foot fishing boat in the middle. I've got my Microsoft Surface out there capturing all kinds of data, and he's on his cell phone connecting right up to the network.
Yeah. Well, I want to be a jet ski pen tester and go to that site. That's what I want to do.
So,
See if
well, you jest, but how easy is that?
yeah. Well, I mean, not any dingbat, but a Pringles can directional antenna and a Raspberry Pi, and sit it on a floaty, and you could sit there and just capture traffic unnoticed for an indefinite amount of time.
Well, and that's the thing. It's you don't know if someone's actually out there doing that, because there's no way to detect that. It's passive, right? You don't actually have to make a connection in order to capture the traffic. All you have to do is listen.
Yeah. And so I don't know if you've had this experience, but a number of the clients that I've been to in the past few years, you know, every couple of them, they're like, oh, we just had a cyber event at some point in time. So it's not unreasonable to imagine that there is somebody out there that has an interest in, you know, s- stealing corporate secrets, you know, holding you accountable for information, just trying to just gather data on you. You know, so in industrial, some of the sites that we go to, it would be devastating if you cause something to happen and release chemicals or something like that into the waterway. And
Absolutely.
it's, you know, and if I said I can count on one hand in the last few years how many of my customers have had you know, some sort of cyber event that was financially expensive, I wouldn't be exaggerating because I can count to 31 on one hand. Um that is true, but that's I'll put that in the show notes.
Well, one of the things though, man, is at least with this particular site, the SSIDs that I was seeing were secured. Now, granted, it was WPA2, so it's not infallible, but you know, it was fairly secure, fairly strong encryption. You know, so they at least had that going
Yeah.
for. I was at another site recently, and while out in the field, I was seeing five or six of their SSIDs. And the ones that I was there to look at, there were three or four of them that were completely open. So while I was there testing, you know, I popped open my trusty Cyberscope-ahh and I connected right up. I did passive scans, I did Nmap scans. I was
Mhm.
able to sit there and see all of the devices on that network. And that particular network had some controls devices on it and some IO devices. And
Yeah, you were
you
telling me
know,
about that.
yeah, and it's commonly known that on most PLCs, it does not take much to disable them. You know, from heavy ping sweeps to active port scans, it does not take much to lock up a PLC, and then then once that thing trips a fault, the entire process stops. You know,
Or even like intercepting the traffic, MAC spoofing, and then just changing bit values too. I mean, there's
correct.
and man, I don't know if you're on that Slack or not, but in one of them, one of the people, Cheryl, was was posting about that she found an access point. You know, they couldn't find an access point, but it was showing active, and they dug all around, and they ended up finding it above a ceiling tile with like drywall still taped to it, and so it's like, you know, but it's in the context of our discussion, right? We're in these sites, and it's like there's stuff that runs for 15, 20 years, and you're
Yep.
just, you know, it's like you can't, it's like an old Toyota truck, you know, you can't kill it. And so there's plenty of opportunity for stuff to just be, we've all seen the network cabinet, the server room that has the bowl of spaghetti, and you don't know which one of those cables
Right.
goes to that device, and you're not touching any of them because then the plant goes down. So yeah, like saying that open, you know, seeing that open stuff, and I mean, even, you know, as WPA2 is becoming more and more exploitable, you know, even that's starting to be a risk. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I've seen it too.
One of the things you can do to mitigate that risk is find and understand just how far your RF is crossing your site boundaries. And then you need to adjust your power levels accordingly, and dial that back. And that alone is a huge thing. I mean, it's low hanging fruit. It's something easily done if you are aware of it. But
Hmm.
if you don't even know to look for things like that, then how are you supposed to mitigate it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's one of the things that makes this such a high risk, because it's met with wireless starting to become more prevalent in manufacturing. It's not necessarily well engineered, because the people who are putting it out there aren't always like you and I, and have all these things in our back pocket that we understand that we have to set, right?
Right.
They're just told by the manufacturer, you turn this knob, it's on, it works, your stuff is connected. Merry Christmas, have a nice day. And they're out the
Hey,
door.
you know, this is a problem that we run into, right? I mean, when we're talking kind of before this, right, where it's like you're doing a design and you have X amount of hours allocated to it and you have to deliver the product, and we have demands of our time, other customers, or if you're that inexperienced person on the site and you say, okay, you know, I need to get from this tower to this tower, and you know, the manufacturer or the person that's telling me this 15 radio, you know, wazoo caboodle kit can do all this stuff, just set these powers, walk through this wizard, and it's going to auto balance it. You know, that stuff is just programmatically designed to be easy to configure out of the box or something. So you just go with whatever value it is. You don't have in your mind, you drive through the gate, you're gone from work. You don't really think about the environment outside of that. So like I mean, even you talking about this waterway system, I'm having nightmares about sites that I've been at where it's like, as an inexperienced person, starting out in this field, it's like, where could I have had that happen? Or I've been recently at a site that's on the water here, sort of locally, and there's a point-to-point link that's, one end of it is on one side of the site and the other end of it's on the other end of the site, and it's just blasting, and it probably goes a couple of miles because of the height and the power on it, and it's just like, if that's not secured, you could get, it's not, this is like a private business, but it's like you could definitely, I think the point to point link is like a state one, it's like you could just be sitting kind of anywhere and capture that stuff. So it's, you leave a default password, or somebody just has, I mean, you could, with these MacBooks or, Raspberry Pi or any of these things, you can just capture traffic promiscuously. And there's tons of tools out there where you don't even have to really know what you're doing. What is it? The script kiddie, right? Where it's like,
Exactly.
you just say, "Hey, let me push this button, and you do the heavy lifting of this exploit for me." I mean, it's
Well,
very easy to get into that stuff.
especially when you're talking with OT security pros like Clint Bodogen from ThreatGen or Pascal Ackerman, these are the guys who actually wrote the books on OT security, right? Or other professionals like Cody Duffy, who I met recently at YCO. From their perspective, situational awareness is a key thing. This is something that we need to make sure we're paying more attention to in the wireless world in general, but specifically in industrial.
Hmm.
There's just a lot going on there.
Well, yeah, I do. You look at the big one in our field, where it's not necessarily like a wireless thing, but Stuxnet, right? Like you
Right.
can you can do a lot of damage by just being kind of negligent or unaware of what's entering your facility.
Absolutely. And then when you're, instead of having it enter your facility, when you're actively pushing it out of the boundaries of your facility, that's just
Well, yeah, like you're talking about, you can pull up on a boat, or we've talked about this before. You can, a lot of these places, you can drive up to the gate and smile at whoever's sitting there and say, "Oh, I'm here to meet John." You just pick a generic name, and they just, a lot of times they'll just wave you on through, and then
I've been
the
I've been to some sites where physical security was a joke. So getting
yeah, yeah, the control panel key, everybody's, most everybody's got a flathead screwdriver, right? Like that's the
absolutely,
joke.
that's the universal cabinet key, right?
Hmm.
I don't think I can really emphasize enough how key situational awareness is to a big chunk of owning your airspace. So beyond that is understanding your RF landscape, and for all our wireless listeners, this will make a little more sense to you because you need to know what's going on. When I'm talking about understanding your RF landscape, let's ask some more questions, right? What other structured wireless networks are operating that you have to coexist with? Okay. Well, let's let you figure there's going to be other Wi-Fi that you're going to have to live with. So there's 802.11. There's if it's an industrial site, there's more than likely going to be some 802.15.4 stuff somewhere. And if not 802.15.4, then there's going to be something proprietary out there that you're not necessarily going to see with you're not going to see it with a Wi-Fi scanner, and 802.15.4 stuff you're not going to see with a Wi-Fi scanner. So you need to break out some spec in so that you can see what else is going on in the spectrum.
Hmm.
You need to talk with the site people. Hey, what are you guys using that you are fully aware of that's out there? What's your corporate using for wireless? If you're trying to expand some OT wireless access for individual client users, that's someone you're going to have to coordinate with because a big part of owning your airspace is getting along with these other wireless assets to maintain a stable wireless environment. You can't secure what's not stable, right? I think that's a pretty
Hmm.
fair statement. And there's a lot going on with these things. And as we know, that 802.11 utilizes the frequencies completely differently than 802.15.4 does. You're looking most of the time at your OFDM and your different Wi-Fi structures versus spread spectrum, which is what the vast majority of what IoT stuff uses. And then even then, how are they applying that, and what are they using mechanics wise behind that to apply that spread spectrum? Because it's not all the same, especially when you start getting into proprietary stuff. So while they might be basing it off of DSSS as a standard, they're adding their own kind of secret sauce into the back end of it. And on top of that, which frequency they're using.
Yeah. Well, a good example too is I mean, even not necessarily like a vendor, but you got Wi-Fi Halo and LoRaWAN. Definitely, I was at a site a couple months ago doing some Halo proof of concept testing for something, and the sprinkler system was running on LoRaWAN, and there wasn't supposed to be any of that RF in the facility.
At 900
So,
megahertz.
yep. Yeah, and then and when you say proprietary, I mean in the entertainment space, or and I mean even in like some chemical manufacturers where they do like point to point links for like information signaling boxes. Dude, good luck knowing that stuff's kind of there. You would probably find it because you know you love spectrum and I can't even say it. You love spectrum analysis, right? So it's like,
Yeah, I'm kind of a
you're
joke.
looking for it and you'll say, hey, what is this? You would see that. But I mean, not everybody's going to have a tool like that just kind of sitting around to see that stuff. So that interference might show up as like just kind of poor performance or something. And then you've got an RRM system that isn't picking up beacon frames, probe requests, any of that stuff from this proprietary stuff because it doesn't put any of that stuff out. And then you got stuff stepping on it.
Yep. I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about, right?
Yep. I'm picking up what you're putting down, man.
So finding out what you have to coexist is one thing, but then you have to take a look at what kind of transient networks do you have going across your site. If you don't understand what I mean by transient site, well, it's transient wireless. It comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. And so what's transient wireless? Well, you have mobile hotspots, right? People are always popping up hotspots on their phone because they want to connect their laptop to wireless that's not corporate, so they don't have the restrictions. You can't legally, you can't block that Wi-Fi, right? Marriott found out about that the hard way when they tried to do that a few years back, block people's hotspots to force them to use their pay to play, and they got fined by the FCC to the tune of $500,000 per site that was doing it. So needless to say, that's a big no-no. So the only way you can really control that is via policy, right? Your thou shalts. Thou shall not use hotspots while on this property for XYZ reasons.
Mhm.
You can control it that way, but how many people, even though they sign the paperwork saying they'll abide by that rule, actually abide by that rule? Because
Yeah.
it's not something you can touch, feel, taste, or whatever. The only way you're going to see it is if you're scanning for it, right?
Well, I'll just have for the record that I never, ever, ever would even consider violating any kind of policy like that.
Ever, I'm sure. And
Yeah.
you know what? You're a fine, upstanding young citizen. I don't think you would ever violate that policy.
But I mean, that is, when you say like mobile hotspots too, and then, it's not just a phone, right? Like if you're in and out, we do a lot of outdoor stuff, right? So, um, if you travel enough, sometimes you get status and you get the nice car, and sometimes the nice car's got Wi-Fi built into
That's
it,
true.
or that you hit a certain part of the production line, and then that vehicle turns on and it's got Wi-Fi in it. So that's not necessarily like a security example, but that could be an interferer.
Well, it's intermittent RF, right?
Hmm.
It's transient RF.
Yep.
And then, how many sites have you gone to that have massive shipping and receiving?
Everyone.
Yeah, I mean, with trucks in and out. Well, a big part of that, and if you've never seen this before, I challenge you to go to a site that's got a bunch of shipping and receiving, and just sit there with your Wi-Fi scanner and with these trucks coming and going, and I want you to look for PNET. It'll be PNET followed by a string of numbers, and you will eventually see that come and go. And what PNET is one of the most popular forms of fleet management for trucking. And it's for preventive maintenance on the vehicles and a bunch of different things, satellite tracking, so on and so forth. But a lot of times they also broadcast Wi-Fi on the truck for various sensors on the vehicle, and sometimes even for usage by the driver. And so you'll see PNet SSIDs, I swear, probably 80% of the pulp and paper sites that I've been to, and I've been to probably the better part of 40 different pulp and paper sites. A better part of 80% I have seen PNet at those. At production facilities that had nothing to do with pulp and paper, at roofing manufacturing facilities, at that smelting facility I went to, I saw them there. It's fleet management. And then on top of that is all your independent trucks, your independent truckers who have their own stuff just screaming off. And like Billy Ray's wireless, Joe's
Hmm.
5G, and it's just blasting off of their trucks. And it comes and
And
it goes, and it comes and it goes.
sometimes it's also not HR friendly SSIDs too.
Correct. Well, then you also get all your guys who think they're the most original funny humans on the planet, and it's
FBI van.
CIA surveillance van, because nobody's ever done that before, right?
I got a neighbor that has that. On a side note, a really good one of those is it burns when I pee.
Yeah, yeah. Tell my wife I love her.
I should set that one. That's if you're listening, change it to that for Valentine's Day.
Yeah, tell my wife I love her. Yeah.
She will not be happy though, because then you'll have to like reconfigure
Reset
all
every
her
device in the
devices.
house, right? Kids be screaming why their iPads aren't working.
That'd be a different security issue altogether though, then. Frying pan on a stick.
The CWNP Wireless IoT Track is the only certification program available that not only covers wireless IoT protocols in common use, but IoT as a technology and solution that is revolutionizing industry and business at the same time. When you work through the IoT track, you learn the protocols, the devices, the data, and the applications that bring the true value IoT has to offer. And for those with the tenacity to persevere, the world's elite IoT certification completes the process and the certified wireless IoT solutions expert credentials. If you want to be in the cutting edge of what's happening in technology, you won't find a better certification program for the Internet of Things.
Yeah,
Moving on.
so transient, I mean that's definitely like a peculiar and interesting problem too,
Well, I
because it's
tell you,
like,
that's something I never thought about until I transitioned to industrial over 8 years ago. Never thought about it because in the higher ed environment, that's not something I saw.
mhm.
It was in the higher ed environment, it was all about, density, user density and high density deployments. So kids in dorms and kids in classrooms and auditoriums and how many devices can you squeeze off of one access point? I did not think about, major transient wireless at all, transient RF in general.
Yeah, and and a lot of that stuff too. It's like a lot of the newer devices too. It's like you can, so many of them are like just assumed to be a hotspot capable device, and 10 years ago that wasn't the case at all. Or I mean, there are ones that could do it, but
Yep. Then on top of what you have to coexist with, and then the transient stuff, you need to look at sources of EMI RFI. Where we are talking industrial manufacturing, right? You really, that's something I very rarely ever saw when I worked higher ed or private sector, were major sources of RFI. It's something I see quite commonly in industrial and manufacturing, especially depending on the sites that you go to and what kind of machinery they're using. So anything that uses infrared or generates mass amounts of infrared, the process of creating that infrared typically will output quite a bit of 2.4 interference. I was at an industrial ceramics facility, and after the ceramics came out of an extruder, it went directly into a giant drying system. Well, it was a microwave drying system. What does microwave use? 2.4. Only this wasn't, milliwatts. This wasn't even 1,000 watts like your microwave at home. These were, thousands and thousands of watts worth of microwave. to dry out the ceramics as it came out of the actual creation process before it would go to sit to green up for a while before they could actually fire it in the automated kilns.
Mm.
And at this one particular site, they had three brand new dryers, which were all super shielded and super awesome. But they had an older one that they had shipped in from their parent company in Japan.
Oh,
And due to
Bessie.
the age and whatnot, was grandfathered in, didn't have to have all of the shielding that the others had. And sure enough, it was crushing 2.4, just straight up crushing it. It was unusable anywhere within probably 200-300 feet of that machine.
Mhm. Yeah, it sounds like the power was approaching 1.21 gigawatts for
It very
sure.
well could be. Now, granted, they did not get up to 88 miles an hour, but the power levels were there.
Yeah, well, close. One of the two elements needed.
That's true. Once you get past understanding your RF landscape, it's time to start securing your assets, right?
So what? Let me ask you this too. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, no, no. Go ahead.
But I mean, we're talking about the RF landscape, but we're also talking about something like that. And if you kind of have that knowledge, you detected that with spectrum analysis, right?
Right.
And so, if somebody wanted to do that maliciously, ha- is there, are there, what are, because I'm not really super red. I'm going to admit my ignorance here, but it seems like that's a possible avenue of attack too, to be able to kind of understand how to detect that. Like,
Oh, that's totally an attack vector.
because you could do
What do
like
you think?
a,
What do
you
you
could
think
do a
signal hammers are?
something that could do like a replay, right? Like maybe it's like one of those like Aronias, I think it is. That's probably not the right name, but like one of those like really high end Wi-Fi signal generators, or
Absolutely.
it's a spectrum analyzer that can replay stuff.
Well, I mean, you can get signal generators relatively inexpensive.
Yeah. Okay.
They're fairly low power, but that doesn't mean you can't add more power to them. And it's not like you really need to be too terribly far away from them. You know what I mean? It's
Oh yeah.
some of
Oh
these
yeah. They're
small devices. If you place them at strategic points, it could disrupt communication.
couple. Yeah. It looks like a couple $100 easy.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you take
Yeah. I
look
just
take
I
a
just was thinking. I just
you've used a lot of uh, uh, coax. you know
yeah.
you take the signal generators that you use to plug into that coax to simulate what you're actually going to be pushing through there, and you put an antenna on that instead of the coax adapter, right?
Right.
What do you think you're pushing out there? You're pushing out nothing but raw RF noise.
Yeah. That is true. Yeah, and I guess you could and I mean you could definitely violate the spirit of how devices work, I imagine, and probably put a signal generator on something and kind of high gain violate the EIRP
Correct.
limit. Yeah. Okay. Now that's good. I mean,
I would be interested to hear Jim's take on that. We'll have
well,
to we'll have to
we'll
hit
have to
him
get him
up.
some Oreos
Yeah.
and bribe him.
I think he'd appreciate some bourbon or whiskey a little bit more than he would Oreos, but
We'll get him some bourbon that's had Oreos sitting in it for. He probably actually that would not want that. He'd want it
no, no, I
separate.
don't think I would want that either. That's maybe just a nice bottle of bourbon and a pack of Oreos. Keep it simple, right?
That's right. That is right. Well, I'm going to note that down because I would like to. That'd be interesting.
I would be interested to see what you could do with your signal generators that you use for, figuring that out on your coax. What happens if you would slap just a cheapo generic Omni on that sucker that you bought from Amazon for $10?
Well, I mean, we're still, for our coax typically, right? And the way that we deploy it is you end up with a SISO system. So you could do kind of anything that could run off of that. And typically they're tuned for whatever frequency. And so like I know the Siemens cable is either like a 2.4 or a 5 gigahertz cable. But we've toyed with stuff like that on entertainment things where it's you instead of putting a terminating load on the end of it, you just put an AMI or something to cover a gap in like a maintenance area where you can't run, where it's like it's mobile, so you can't necessarily put a segment in there, but you want to retain coverage. But I mean, you definitely like you could. I mean, you could hide some of that. You could create some problems with some of that stuff too, because it's
Well,
uh
there's these the name escapes me right now, and I've got two of them, but there's these two very inexpensive cheapo spectrum analysis devices that also are signal generators.
like the time like
The
something
tiny,
like the
yeah,
tiny
it's the
SA.
tiny SAs, correct. Those are spectrum analysis devices, but they are also signal generators. Now, mind you, they run off batteries, so they're not going to create enough to disrupt something serious.
Hmm.
But an ingenuitive individual could definitely turn those into something that could be a solid attack vector.
Yeah, well, especially if you're in some of these like not well defined protocol. Well, I say not well defined, but like if you're not in like an 802.11 type protocol or like the wireless heart and stuff like it, or if it's kind of just working on an open source and it's you got like a sensor or something like that. I mean, if you can capture that, replay it, and manipulate it, you could potentially convince the system that it's something's on fire or I mean, and that's how much is it to get, to remediate a fire suppression system that blows without I mean, whether there's an emergency or not, right? Like even just stuff like that.
Now, the signal generation that I have messed with was in 900 megahertz, and I actually got a few captures of that. If I'll see about adding that to the show notes. Is just the images of the captures that I got of what the signal generation looked like in 900 megahertz. Now, again, this was a tiny SA, so it's not a ton of power. I was sitting right next to it, but it has a unique signature. It does not look like any sort of other communication signature. It's very easy to identify the fact that that's just a noise generator.
Hmm.
Now, am I saying that all RFIs like that? Absolutely not. I'm saying it is from this particular signal generator.
Right.
But it's interesting because even with something, a little device that you spent, $80 on Amazon is capable of disrupting somebody's communication somehow.
That might in the show notes. I mean, I'm sure most everybody listening would be familiar with that, but just even that kind of neat little graph of like what the SNR represents, right? And so if you raise that noise floor, then you reduce the ability to like do the demodulation of the signal. So yeah, I mean that's definitely like it doesn't matter if it's predictable or follows something, right? Like if you got somebody yapping in your ear really loud while you're trying to talk to somebody, you're going to disrupt their conversation. So
So, if you're interested about what that looks like when you go to the site to register for the book giveaway, go look for my blog post about affordable spectrum analysis, and I actually have a write up on the several different devices that I use, and Tiny SA is one of them. So you can kind of take a look at what those things are looking like if you don't have one. So after all that, because
that was
that
a
wasn't enough
boondoggle.
to go through, right?
Yeah.
You need to actually start securing your individual wireless assets. And so 802.11, this is something that there is a gazillion resources out there on for setting your security for Wi-Fi. I'm not going to get into all the details on that because it has been done a gazillion times. I don't need to. If you would like more information, by God, there is a crap ton of it out there. But I will say this for the OT guys who may not be familiar. Um, WEP, wired wired equivalent privacy is garbage. Do not use it. WPA, Wi-Fi protected access is garbage. Do not use it. I do understand that some places do have some legacy devices in place, and that's all they can do. And sometimes you have to document instead of mitigate because those are needed devices, but you got to make sure you are aware that they are there. Otherwise, do not use WEP or WPA. That's, that's a screen door with no latch. That's what that is. So now that I've clarified that, we mentioned WPA2 earlier. We were saying how WPA2 is still pretty good, but it is not infallible. Because like Jeremy said earlier, it is more and more exploits are being found with it just in general. But one of the things that can really strengthen your WPA2, if your devices are compatible, is enabling management frame protection, right? So management frame protection right off the bat eliminates 3 or 4 of your major attack vectors because they all involve that initial capturing that initial handshake traffic before the encryption starts. And that is how they get in there and either deauth or set up for evil twins or so on and so forth. So if you can enable management frame protection, that alone will take you leaps and bounds for a while to give you that time to start transitioning over to WPA3. And so for my OT guys, what is so great about WPA3 and what is it doing for you? Well, WPA3 has some key factors to it. I'm not going to get into the actual mechanics of how it works, but understand these things. One, the management frame protection is actually mandatory. If you are WPA3 compatible, you are using MFP by default. That's just how it is. There is no negotiation. You're protecting all of that aspect. Two, it has stronger and more advanced encryption algorithms. Okay, so you're bumping from 128 bit encryption to 192 bit, and in some cases 256 bit, right? And it's using more advanced encryption algorithms. All right, so you've moved to larger encryption values and stronger encryption algorithms. That's a pretty big deal there because that just closes up even more possible attack vectors that have been discovered on lower amounts of encryption, right? And then kind of across the board, WPA3 as a standard does address some of the other base vulnerabilities that were discovered recently in WPA2, and it corrects those. So there is a significant jump in security going from WPA2 to WPA3. If you can transition to that, I highly recommend it. If you can't, at least try to engage your management frame protection. And if you can't do that, document, document, document. What you cannot mitigate, make sure you document so that as things go, if you have an incident, at least you have the documentation to say, hey, look, we were planning to go this route. This is what we are now. I documented everything. We were doing the best we could until we could afford to move forward. So that goes a long way to help address risk liability. And for those of you who don't know, a big portion of my job is actually cybersecurity on the industrial side of the house too. So there's a lot of crossover in these different sections for me.
Well, that doesn't the WPA3 also, even if you have the simple, I mean, aside from somebody, punching it in, you got the admin password that the the shop floor person wants you to put in so that way they can easily remember it. But if somebody sniffs that out of the air, they're not necessarily going to get that because it's as with that higher level of encryption, it's as difficult to descramble that as it is like a bigger password
Yeah, and
or more complex.
that's one of the main purposes of the management frame protection is to keep that key exchange private, right? So what about non-Wi-Fi devices? So let's look at 802.15.4. Okay. So by the standard, anything that is 802.15.4 compliant has to be capable of 128-bit AES encryption, period. It has to be as part of the standard. Now, the thing is with 802.15.4, it stops at layer 2. Okay, so anything after layer 2 is a Wild Wild West. If it is a 15.4 compliant standard, that could be the only security available for that device. Okay. Fortunately, most manufacturers who create 15.4 standard stuff add additional security measures on top of that. Usually when we're talking about this, it's some sort of mesh topology. There are onboarding practices. Many times, those onboarding practices are set up in specialized ways using specific app keys or onboarding techniques that make it difficult to actually connect to that mesh if you are not a pre-configured device. Additionally, things like wireless HART throw in an actual security management device. They frame count. They use CRC check error checks, as does ISA 100. But ISA 100, if I'm correct, is not a 15.4. I'd have to go back and look that up. So all these guys tend to add multiple other security factors on top of that, right? Well, what about what's not 15.4 compliant? What about your proprietary stuff, right? So, well, let's look at that. Let's start with Jeremy. Let's start with your favorite, the Curb, right? The Cisco Ultra Reliable Wireless Backhaul. This is crazy stuff. For those of you who haven't used it, it's awesome. It can do some amazing things, but it is not 802.11.
MPLS over wireless.
What kind of security breakdowns do they run on there?
So those are typically it's like it's a shared passphrase that's in there, and then you can do AES encryption. And then I would need to refresh myself on the newer Cisco, like what level of encryption it is. But it's, now that it's in the newer hardware, it's probably going to be kind of maximized. So the telemetry and stuff is changing on it too.
Well, I imagine at minimum it's 128-bit AES, right?
Yeah,
And then, you're already telling me that for onboarding connecting devices, it's got to have a shared secret on top of all that. So it's just furthering what I was saying before. It has a baseline encryption and then additional security practices on top of that, right?
right.
So when you look at other manufacturers, let's look at Phoenix Contact, because it's got a bunch of wireless I/O, and that wireless I/O is not 15.4 standard, but their wireless I/O does use 128-bit AES encryption, and does have some very specific onboarding processes that help protect that mesh communication, right? Esteem radios. There's Esteem does a lot of interesting industrial radios in 2.4, 5 gig, and in 900 megahertz. That's what I've used. I've used their 900 megahertz stuff. But again, your standard, 128-bit AES encryption on top of other internal security measures to keep radio-to-radio communications. Banner is an interesting company as far as what they do for their sensors. Banner, for their sensors, from everything that I have gone through, and I've deployed a fair amount of their sensors, they're 900 megahertz, and they use a kind of their own proprietary protocols. They are using frequency hopping. I got some spec-and caps, and it's some really cool little frequency hopping that you can see. But good luck trying to actually intercept and capture that traffic due to the protocols that they use for transmitting back and forth. But even in their documentation, it says they don't encrypt it. It's unencrypted, but the actual values that they are transmitting back and forth for the data only hold context to other banner radios. If you were to magically intercept their traffic and magically capture that data that they're bursting back and forth for sensor information, it's going to have zero context for anything that you may try to intercept. You'll have no idea what it means, because it takes another fully connected banner radio to understand and decode that. The steps that it would take to even make use of intercepted traffic would be astronomical. I mean, you would really have to go above and beyond to understand the tank levels,
Yeah.
or the temperature that it's giving, and these devices don't interact. They're just read, right, on these sensors. So it's not like it's even actionable data throughput. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Because it's
So, you know,
it appears as or not gibberish, but like you don't get it all.
it's just really interesting, all of the variety of security types that are out there that are more than just encryption. Encryption is not the end all be all when it comes to securing your assets, right?
Yeah.
And I guess that's all that's really kind of my point. Is encryption is not your end all be all. There are other important mechanics that are involved in securing your assets. Speaking of that, another really big thing that you need to make sure you're taking care of is management access, right? unless you absolutely have to have it, disable OTA, over the air management access. Unless it's needed for like mesh configuration, that is one of your number one exploitable things, right? Over the air management access. You want to disable that. Additionally, you want to make sure that all of your management access, regardless, is either what 443 or uh, HTTPS or SSH. You don't ever want to do plain text telnet, plain text HTTP. So you want to make sure it's encrypted from that aspect. And then in general, and I think this is true pretty much for any network device, you want to put your management of that device, if it is capable, on a specific VLAN, so that its data is on one VLAN and then its management is on another. So you completely separate the functions as far as traffic flow is concerned.
Mhm.
Does
Yeah,
that make
we have,
sense?
yeah, so for that, like we have, I mean, some customers don't, it falls on deaf ears, but we have some, you put it on that alternate VLAN and then you tie that, if it's dependent on the size of the system, right? But then there's an access port where you're allowed to go plug into that port and that's kind of the only, your courtesy port or whatever, that's the only place that you can log in and access that without having like a higher up, somebody in the NOC adjust the policy and stuff. And then, the term is like defense in depth, right? That's
Right.
so where it's like, not only to kind of add on to that, where you're talking about VLAN segmentation, it's like, if you have one port that's allowed to do that VLAN, and I don't know how popular these are, but I mean, we've seen sites where people put a port lock in there and then somebody has to have a key to actually like unscrew that. We've done some systems where it's not necessarily like wireless control, but machine access with a VPN, and it's, you have a security device that can establish a VPN tunnel with a DMZ and tie in a digital input to enable the VPN on the device itself, and then also having somebody have to physically log into that server and then re-enable that connection. So it's like the more, it's a pain in the butt to if you need to just make a quick change or something, but our systems, once you get them dialed in, you're not touching them a bunch, or you're hopefully not touching them a bunch unless something goes wrong. So you do want to kind of like close the door and double check that you lock it. So I mean, that's definitely like the physical access as well as the logical segmentation is certainly something to consider.
I'll agree to that. I'll
And then
agree.
I see your bullet point on the next one, and that is my favorite one. The the default passwords and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
security settings. I
So
got the notes printed, so
I
that's
was I was like,
we might
man,
be on
you
different.
would think this would be beaten into everybody ad nauseum by now. But let's beat this dead horse a little bit more, right? Don't ever use default passwords and default security settings. Please, please, please make sure that's one of the first things you change once you open that box.
Mhm.
So, I
Well,
mean,
well, some of them, I know the Siemens radios, the initial security context, it says you must change this to a password. And it won't let you put like which it's the default one's not admin for them, but it'll make you change it. And then we have some customers where and I understand there's different people coming through that might need to access this device throughout a shift, but they don't want to have to remember like a certain password for this and this and this. So they get you to go in there and say, this is not secure. Like set it back to admin, and I die a little inside every time that that's that. And then because then it's also like not that it's my favorite show, but the Sex and the City episode, the post-it always sticks twice. The post-it note password is the bane of our existence too. Flip the keyboard up at the workstation and you're going to find a
right?
password to something
Yeah, it's usually on the wall in the bathroom, right? Wi-Fi password. Uh,
in the porta potty along with the other inappropriate content
right.
that people draw.
So, if nothing else, when you turn off this episode, if you don't remember anything else, think about these three key things right here. Okay. So number one, owning your industrial airspace is so much more than simply encrypting the wireless traffic. There are so many more things involved. Okay. I hope I would have been able to really kind of make that point across to you. Two, you really need to look at your site as a whole to fully understand your overall risk, right? And I really can't stress that enough, because this goes right back to, it's more than just encryption. There's a lot of other factors involved. And you need to fully understand your site so that you can create a security system that works in synergy with everything else, right? But probably the most important detail of this is something that I preach to my OT network clients, my OT security clients, and to all of my wireless people. You do not have the luxury of deciding whether or not you are a target. That's not up to you. I have been to entirely too many places. Oh, we're just a small little thing. Nobody thinks about us. Well, you know what? That's not up to you. That is not your decision to make. That's up to the bad actor and what they feel like doing that day. That has nothing to do with you. So you need to make sure you are taking the steps that you can logically afford to take. That's what I got. You got anything else to throw in there, Jeremy?
Well, to your second point, I think that your first example at the very beginning of the episode, taking a boat out there and you're outside of the fence line, you're outside of your geofencing, is that, looking at your site, just think about the fact that, we're talking about wireless, right? And wireless doesn't just stop at the gate. It
Correct.
doesn't stop at the road. So, look at your site as a whole, and then look outside your site, and then look from the outside in.
I think that's a worthy addition. Everybody, thanks again for hanging out. Be sure to hit the industrialwifi-shop.com, hit the show notes for this episode, and register for your chance to win one of these 2 copies of the CWISA book. You'll be glad you did. And check back for our next episode. And Jeremy, thanks for hanging out, man. I appreciate your Vanna to my Pat Sajak.
Yep. Well, I'll flip the letters for you any day.
You're a letter flipper. I've heard that about you.
Oh, also, don't forget to look on Scott's site for those the signal captures. That's a pretty
Yes,
good
I'll make sure I
article.
get the signal captures put into the show notes. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we hope you join us on our next episode of the Industrial Wi-Fi Shop.